Howdy y'all, welcome back. Let's take a walk down the streets of Scotland. More specifically, let's direct our attention to Glasgow and the earliest known photographs of that city. Diving back into our Old World series, I'd like to share these photographs with you, all taken before the turn of the century, before the year 1900. As we dive into these images, it's amazing to see all the intricate architecture in place, seemingly constructed with the utmost attention to detail, as we witness buildings of perfectly aligned masonry, facades, some of which are still intact today, beautiful sculptures and adornments. All the while, the majority of these buildings appear so close that they are touching. It's hard to dissect, just by the visual evidence, the exact age of the wonderful structures in front of us today. So to help accompany us along this journey, I'll be diving into the official timeline of Glasgow. Hopefully, this can help us paint a better picture of exactly what we are looking at. The history here is so vast in Glasgow that I'm seemingly only going to be able to touch on the key points, but alas, I believe we can address the current narrative through the clues that we have been given. Before we begin, keep a few things in mind. First, look at the lights. Again, we see gas-powered lights on nearly all of the buildings, even in the photographs labeled as the quote, slums. The lighting looks almost ancient. Second, look how clean many of the streets are. For a majority of these photographs, which were taken between 1860 and the late 1800s, I'd say in about all of them, we can see a well-maintained city with well-designed, if not cramped, buildings. The streets are clean, they are paved, they have sidewalks, and many include intricate stonework. All the while, the buildings surrounding them have this unique factory-like presence with raised entrances and elaborate architecture. Third, and most interesting to me, keep in mind as we look through these photographs of Glasgow, all of the people that we see throughout the city. A majority of these images come to us from photographs of the old closes and streets of Glasgow, taken 1868 to 1877 by Thomas Annan, published in 1877. That being said, we see a lively community here, bustling with life. We see the daily activities, the tight-knit quarters, and the people who are beset on all sides by this wonderful architecture. These photographs are very detailed, and Glasgow is certainly not empty. The narrative, however, that leaves a little more for us to decipher. So let's get right into it. Again, this is the currently accepted narrative, replete with names and numbers, which I will provide for you today. Compare these details with what we see in the architecture of the city and understand the dichotomy that is created in Glasgow. The story of Glasgow begins, according to the narrative, in prehistory, with the area being chosen by early Celtic tribes due to its nature as the last fording between the River Clyde and the Moulin de Narburn. As the Romans overtook Britain, calling it Caledonia, they eventually landed amongst the mounds, or the tells, the earthworks of the Celtic people at present-day Glasgow. The Romans transformed these earthworks, according to this narrative, into forts and connected them by building the Antonine Wall, which was used in part to separate Celtic Caledonia from Pictish Caledonia. We're told shortly after completing the wall, the Romans then withdrew from this area completely, and what is today Glasgow remained a relatively peaceful farming community. However, we don't have a lot of evidence to argue for what actually happened during this time period, just that the Romans withdrew, and this was followed by, according to the same narrative, a number of years later, the arrival of Saint Mungo, known as the patron saint of Glasgow, a patron saint of Scotland, as well as the saint of salmon and the saint who protects against bullying. Saint Mungo was said to arrive in the lands of Glasgow in roughly 543, and he created the first bishop of that area by the year 560. Now, stop me if you've heard this before, but the narrative then goes blank, empty, nothing described, from the year 560 through the year 1114, or over 500 missing years. Again, this could be referred to as the Dark Ages, after the fall of Rome, where growth was apparently slowed to a halt, and yet Glasgow was established before these Dark Ages. And the next piece of history doesn't seem to come to us until the year 1114, when Glasgow appears in written documents of David of Strathclyde. In these articles, Glasgow is described as having multiple mills, a large church, and a growing population, which in turn causes the status of the city of Glasgow to be upgraded to a cathedral. 4 years later, in 1118, construction begins on this massive cathedral, said to be built on top of the ruins of one of the earlier Roman fortresses. By 1130, multiple churches venerated by different saints, including John and James, have opened in Glasgow, and by 1136, the massive Glasgow Cathedral is venerated. Here, I must pause to point out briefly the importance of what follows. In the year 1150, the first Glasgow Fair is held in the cathedral courtyard. Essentially, this is said to be the very first holiday, or according to many scholars, the first day of celebration that was not directly related to war or religion in the Christian world. The Glasgow Fair, which still continues to this day, was held during the last 2 weeks of July, and this would be the first event of its kind in the entire world. It is said to be a precursor for the world's fairs of many centuries later, during which time the finest of new technologies, bounties of food, and many imported goods, lavish amounts of spending, combined in a massive showcase put on for the people. In this case, it's said to have begun in Glasgow. However, just 3 years later, in 1153, Glasgow was sacked by Argyll, and it was mostly destroyed. Still in disrepair, William the Lion makes Glasgow an official borough in 1175 or 1178, depending on what narrative you read. This gives Bishop Jocelyn an official charter. Around that same time, Bishop Jocelyn composes the first written history of the area of Glasgow. By the 1220s, Glasgow has a large population of millers, bakers, cobblers, and blacksmiths. We're told the primitive homes of the area are transformed into more intricate homes. By 1240, a church is constructed over the supposed burial mound of St. Mungo. By 1246, the reclusive Black Friars arrived to Glasgow, and the Catholic diocese as a whole in the area continues to grow, adding Roman Catholic engineering techniques to most of the new architecture that's being built. By 1286, the first Glasgow Bridge is completed, spanning the River Clyde, and by 1295, a church is dedicated to St. Enoch, and in return, Edward I of England arrives to Glasgow to visit all of the new churches, as well as to visit the gravesite of St. Mungo. Here, Edward orders the construction of a humongous siege machine, which could have been his real reason for coming, and he also orders 30 transport carts. This siege machine was built to help Edward besiege Bothwell Castle, just miles downriver from Glasgow. We're told the Glasgow Cathedral is still growing at this time, with additions constantly being added. By 1340, Glasgow is known worldwide for its export of salmon and herring. However, by 1350, the Black Death is said to have hit Glasgow for the first time. The losses are extravagant. As Glasgow tried to rebuild from a largely waning population, we're told the next major event in this official current narrative timeline after the 1350 plague is the arrival of the plague again in the year 1384, which basically decimated what was left of Glasgow. We're told after the plague had ravaged this area, the ancient stone constructions of the Roman time period began to be used as stone quarries, being dismantled piece by piece to help rebuild Glasgow. This includes, in 1410, when the Glasgow Bridge mentioned earlier was replaced by one fully made out of new stone masonry. Also by 1410, the population was said to sit around roughly 2,000 people. In the year 1431, an important figure by the name of William Elphinstone is born in Glasgow. Elphinstone would go on to obtain a papal bull for the University of Aberdeen and is credited as bringing the printing press to Scotland. Tying this back to something mentioned just a few moments ago, by 1451, we're told the massive University of Glasgow is established, founded within the grounds of the Blackfriars Monastery. By 1460, the Glasgow Grammar School is open. By 1464, the St. Nicholas Hospital is open, mainly to cater to all of the homeless youth. We're told by 1480, the majority of all the structures in Glasgow were built out of stone masonry. In 1492, Pope Innocent appoints Robert Blackadder as the first Archbishop of Glasgow. Still, by the year 1500, with all this stone masonry and papal importance, we're told the population of Glasgow is less than 3,000 people. In the year 1504, the plague hits Glasgow for the third time, reducing the city's growth. Seemingly unrelated, directly after this plague event, for the next 50 years, we have the famous craft guilds of Glasgow being incorporated into the city. By 1520, the Archdiocese of Glasgow includes Argyll. Now, this is sort of a conflicting detail, at least in regards to the population numbers, but we're told from roughly 1535 through 1556, Glasgow accounts for upwards of 3% of all the taxes that are paid in Scotland. We're told the original Castle of Glasgow is besieged in 1544, and at this time, it is mostly destroyed. In 1556, with a population of just under 4,500 people, the first brewery in Glasgow opens, Well Park Brewery, which still operates to this day. Glasgow is officially represented in the Scottish Parliament by the year 1560. Tragedy strikes, however, when the plague hits Glasgow for the fourth time in 1574. After this period, from 1580 through 1600, the city's mills are rebuilt, the cathedral is saved from demolition, and Glasgow pays upwards of 2/3 of all of Upper Clyde's taxes. At the same time, in 1584, the plague hits Glasgow for the fifth time. However, on a more positive note, the first game of golf, according to many historians, is played in Glasgow along the marshy islands of Glasgow Green. By 1600, the population exceeds 5,000 people for the first time, and by 1604, Glasgow has at least 2 barber surgeons. The surgeons and the merchants formed the Glasgow Town Council in 1605. Interesting, a building called a Talbot is built in 1626, and this represents the town or city hall, with Talbot being spelled like the English toll booth, but it's a common name for these town halls in the Old Scottish. By 1636, over 100 students are attending university at Glasgow regularly, and by 1639, Glasgow is the third richest borough in all of Scotland. By roughly 1641, the sprawling Hutchinson Orphan School and Hospital are open to take in the orphan children from around Scotland, especially within the location of Glasgow. In 1652, a major fire renders most of Glasgow in flames, leaving over 1,000 families homeless, seemingly filling these many orphanages that just opened up in the city. At the same time, one of the world's first fire engines is said to be used in Glasgow at this time. In 1660, many coal pits are reported around the city, and in 1662, the first post office of Glasgow opens. By 1670, Glasgow is Scotland's second largest trade city by volume. In 1678, the first stagecoaches run throughout Scotland and arrive to Glasgow. By By 1680, this population touches 12,000 people for the first time, and by 1690, Scotland and Glasgow are said to be home to one of the earliest branches of the very famous Bank of Scotland. In 1707, Scotland and England are officially united with the Act of Union, and in 1710, the population of Glasgow exceeds 13,000 people. However, the narrative makes a distinct note to say that Glasgow is susceptible to flooding, which does eventually occur. And this leads to many of the streets, including the building entrances, being elevated. We're told in 1718, the first vessel sails from Glasgow to the Americas. In 1719, subsequently, cotton printing becomes a massive business throughout Glasgow. In 1726, Daniel Defoe describes Glasgow as the cleanest and most well-built city in all of the British Empire. From 1737 through 1760, a new Talbot or town hall is constructed. The Glasgow University begins printing its own materials by the 1740s, and by 1750, Glasgow is lined with massive factories, including 5 or more sugar factories. By 1755, the population exceeds 23,000, and it's written those 23,000 people produce over 2.2 million meters of linen per year. In 1769, the future of mankind is seemingly changed when James Watt manifests his ideas for the steam engine in Glasgow while walking along the Glasgow Greens. By 1776, what a year, Glasgow has full trade routes with America, flourishing in the distribution of sugar and cotton. In 1783, Britain's first Chamber of Commerce is founded in Glasgow. In 1785, a successful flight occurs from Glasgow to Howick in a hot air balloon. By 1794, the absolutely huge Glasgow Royal Infirmary opens, essentially used at the time for housing the insane, poor, or homeless. In 1800, the Glasgow Police Act is passed by Parliament, creating the first ever modern prevention policing force. From 1810 through 1815, multiple lunatic asylums open in Glasgow. By 1818, Glasgow is converted to gas lights, including gas street lights and interior lights powered by natural gas. In 1827, the elaborate Argyle Arcade opens, and the following year, in 1828, James Beaumont Nelson makes a breakthrough in iron smelting technology in Glasgow. Railways begin to arrive in Glasgow by the 1840s, leading to a massive uptick in population and more advanced renovations on the already existing ancient architecture. In 1844, the Glasgow Stock Exchange opens. By 1849, the Queen Victoria visits the city, which in return creates a buzz driving Glasgow to be Scotland's largest city, with a population of 330,000 people by the year 1851. Nearly 20% of this population boom were said to be of Irish descent. In just under 100 years, officially 96, the population of Glasgow rose from an estimated 23,000 people to 330,000 people. At the same time, the fortifications from Roman times melted away into modern constructions of massive red brick factories and solid masonry. The catch? As we've read, not all the details seem to add up. At perfect times, we have events said to be unrelated, but clearly they're carrying a correlation. For example, the first prevention police force, said to be the first in the world, was opened in Glasgow, followed by an abundance of insane asylums opening in just 10 years that followed. Another example, the city warns of being susceptible to being covered in mud in the early 1700s, only to have some sort of event occur where the city was dug out in the early 1800s. How do we know this? Because we're told while they were digging the city of Glasgow out, they hit natural gas, and in return decided to light the city with the natural gas. Just another example, we have successful balloon travel across Scotland, stemming out of Glasgow in the 1700s. This helped to shape the rest of the balloon travel that would happen in Europe. We could really go on all night with these. There are no wires anywhere in the city. All we have are gas-powered lights, and then we have a trolley that's running. Very amazing. Now, as we look through these photographs, I want to wrap it up with this. Do you see any inconsistencies that stand out about the currently accepted narrative as compared to these photographs? As we look through these numerous images today, what of many of these anomalies stood out to you the most? Does this architecture in Glasgow, do the people residing in this great city, do they appear to fit the narrative? Or does it all just possibly paint a picture of the old city of Glasgow, which can seldom be explained today? I'd love to hear your thoughts and your comments down below. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and share this video and these images anywhere that you feel that they can teach others. I always look forward to coming here, to sharing my ideas, and to learning with you. And if you'd like to reach out to me or support the channel, you can do so here. Thank you for joining me today. Can't wait to see you on the next video. Share your comments down below, and cheers.